we've been fortunate enough to be joined by a company that's solving problems in network infrastructure build that national scale telcos either can't or won't solve for themselves. If you've ever cursed because for all the amazing things telecoms is supposed to do, you just can't get a signal, then you might want to hear from Sam Jackman, the Chief Development Officer at Shared Access. In the coming hour, I'll give Sam some time to introduce what he and the Shared Access team are doing in hopefully under 10 minutes. But the majority of the hour is for conversation and questions arising from what he says and its implications. In the audience, you're welcome to send in your own questions and comments through the chat at any time, and I'll do my best to weave them into the conversation. But we also have two experts here who've made it their profession to ask senior executives the kind of uncomfortable questions that their subordinates probably won't. That is Dimitris Mavrakis, the director at ABI Research, and Ern Worthman, a veteran journalist with a particular interest in infrastructure, and most recently editor at AGL Media in the USA. We'll give them time to ask plenty of questions to Sam, and then towards the end of the hour, I'll try and draw together some of that input into some concrete ideas and suggestions that Sam can take away. So we'll be hearing plenty from Ern and Dimitris soon, but for now I'd like to hand over to Sam to introduce Shared Access. Sam, our producer Kaio is here at your call to put up and move the slides, your video and so on. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thanks for setting me up with two industry vets to ask some tough questions. That's always fun. Yeah, look, I've pulled together some slides which give a high level of sort of explanation of the market. So if we run through these, there's a video at the end, about a couple of minutes, just talking about one of the use cases and one of the opportunities out there. But really, what I want to talk about today is the fact that new approaches are needed if we're going to roll out infrastructure, especially if we're going to move from macro, high-level rooftop infrastructure down to the street, and also if we're going to improve indoor mobile connectivity and then find new use cases to drive investment in connectivity. So if we start off with the first slide, trying to summarize a lot of history in one slide is quite difficult, but if you look at mobile network operators worldwide, they have different levels of success. But if you look in Europe in particular, mobile carriers have spent a huge amount of money. They've spent massive sums on spectrum from governments and from regulators themselves. They've also then had to build actual mast infrastructure, and over time we've seen them embrace new models like working with neutral hosts like Shared Access. They also have the core infrastructure, they have RAN upgrades, and then they have the costs that every business has. They have to market, they have to go out and find customers, and they have people, they have staff costs. And all of these things have meant that actually the return on investment for most mobile carriers, if you look back over the last 15 years, haven't been great. And one of the key points I was always taught about business is if you lose control of the price of your product, ultimately your business is going to be in trouble. And what we've seen is lots of competition, regulators forcing 3 or 4 or even 5 in the past, different carriers in certain markets. And what that has meant and led to is a price war. You've also had the introduction of MVNOs and people like that as well, all of which mean that if you can't raise your price, you can't then control those costs mentioned up above. And so it's really time that we need to look at how we change the model of how infrastructure is financed in most countries. If you go to the next slide. This is just a very high-level example of what is being talked about potentially in terms of how we move from a macro-level infrastructure deployment to what could be called small cells, what could just be called small coverage or small capacity areas. But the blue circle there is a good example of what a macro rooftop in part of London in Catford could potentially cover. So it's quite a wide range, and this could be covering for 2G and for 4G services. When you talk to different people, they'll give you different answers, but potentially it could be that for every one of those small yellow circles, a single operator deployment is needed. So this could be a small cell that is neutral host for all different MNOs, or each one of those could be for one single MNO. The capacity demands are high enough for them to deliver the services they need. This could be very long term, where we're talking self-driving cars and you've got to have unbelievable levels of data throughput, or this could just be driven by individual use cases of 5G in those areas. So the demand is going to go through the roof, and the cost of deploying that, if we keep following the old model, is just not going to be cost effective, especially when you think about all the other costs that the carriers have. If we go to the next slide. So these then are some of the other issues that the carriers are facing as well. And a lot of these are the same issues we've already talked about at the start. But fundamentally, in the UK in particular, landlords are not really interested in working with carriers to deploy rooftops. One of the big changes we've had in the UK market in 2017 was the introduction of the Electronic Communications Code. Now, there already was a code, but it was changed, it was modified massively. And from an economic point of view, from a landlord point of view, this has made it a lot less attractive to host mobile operator equipment. This isn't so much of an issue in other markets, although there is talk in some markets that something similar could be implemented. But on the one side, this sounds great. We're going to lower our rents and our costs. On the other side, it may mean that actually you can't find locations that you need, which then causes a whole other problem of how you can deploy equipment. I already mentioned that rooftops maybe won't be the best thing in terms of the small cell deployments. If you think about large areas like Canary Wharf, where you can really see this in microcosm, because the buildings are so high, actually, if you want coverage down on the ground where people are walking around, especially if you want it to be high frequency coverage like 5G, the rooftop solution just doesn't work from a technical point of view as well. And that's why it needs to move down lower onto the ground. That will then mean you need more infrastructure, and that could potentially increase the cost. The other issues here then are the same things they've already been going on in the past. There are more upgrades, there are more network pieces of work that need to be done, and you've still got to go out and sell your services to the public, and you've still got to have your staff, your people costs all on top of everything else. And so these things are really critical in trying to understand how these operators are looking at the next 5 to 10 years of deployments. And if we think about it from a country point of view, needing digital infrastructure, I think everybody needs to embrace the fact that something needs to change. We move on. So one option I just described there was small cells. So this is an example of a small cell shared access I've deployed at Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, where we have an indoor DAS as well inside the stadium. But this is a piece of infrastructure working with the council in Haringey as well as the club. This is shared infrastructure, both in terms of multiple mobile network operators, but also you can see there, this is being used for CCTV, this is being used for lighting. So the cost can be defrayed against different benefits and different services being provided, and can also be helping addressed by the club contributing some of the money, the council, and the neutral host, and therefore the mobile network operators. So these sort of things can be done. It takes a lot of collaboration, and it takes a lot of open-mindedness, shall we say, but all of this can really be impacting. One of the things we've also seen change in the mobile operators is that from our network planning point of view, they are starting to really open up and allow other third parties to get involved in this. Now, in different countries, it moves at different speeds, but allowing the people like ourselves, the neutral hosts, and the other people involved in this process to have a say on where the network performance needs to really be improved is a real game changer from our point of view. Next slide. And then lastly, this is where we at Shared Access really see the evolution and really see the future. What I showed you before was a small cell. So that would have a lower power level than a macro type deployment. That wouldn't be something that actually could replace a rooftop. It would complement and work with a rooftop. This is where we see the future. We see sort of pole type infrastructure. In this case, we have a podium at the bottom where there are radio equipment in place. You can connect this potentially via lit or dark fiber, depending on the network configuration. In this example, we have radios on the outside of the pole, but those could be canister antennas as well from a planning point of view. But crucially, this is high power. This has a lot of amps going through it, and this could travel and provide coverage almost on a par with a rooftop based on work we've done with some of the carriers. And so ultimately, we see this as the way of getting down closer to the street and seeing a technical solution that's different to a rooftop. You will still need rooftops in lots of locations, but actually this is probably the best way to deploy infrastructure, we think, for the next 10 to 15 years in the outdoor environment. But again, this will require a lot of collaboration, both from a funding, from a technical, and from a deployment point of view. If we move on then, the other areas one of the other areas I wanted to talk about was indoor coverage. So indoor coverage historically has always been a problem, especially as buildings have become smarter, especially as buildings have become better from an insulation point of view, from an ESG point of view. Effectively, what we're doing is creating Faraday cages. And you can see here, this is data from Ookla, just picked at random about London. Red is bad, and you can see quite clearly there's a lot of red, there's a lot of bad. Historically, indoor connectivity has always been a problem for carriers because the cost justification has never really been there. If you think about a commercial office, there may be 200 to 300 people in a large commercial office. In that environment, how many lines are you actually going to sell to justify the cost of installing either a DAS or a neutral host in building service, even a cellular repeater in some locations, as well as the base station equipment when needed, monitoring the network and ensuring that everything is done and designed the way it should. So this is an area where actually we've already seen some significant change in a lot of markets. The UK, Europe, the US are all market shared access have been doing this in, but I know all over the world this is something that's taken place. And it's really a good example of how embracing change in terms of a technological solution and a financing solution is really, really important. If you go to the next slide. The arguments really in favor of landlords, tenants, businesses, or other community groups funding connectivity inside are quite simple from our point of view. They are very simply that mobile operators are being treated differently from the way other people in the market are being treated. When you build a building, power is not something that you expect to be there. The landlord has to bring power to that location. The same with water, the same with fiber, and the tenants themselves usually install their own Wi-Fi inside those locations too. They also provide all of the infrastructure for fit outs, all of the funding for fit outs, all of those sort of things. So moving mobile connectivity to be seen as something that someone other than a carrier should fund is a really critical part of this journey. The operators in the past haven't always embraced this, I have to be clear though. This has been one of the problems. We've had situations where standards have been set so high that actually the cost justification could never be worked out because the carriers are saying you have to have everything, all bells and whistles, always a DAS, for instance, instead of maybe a repeater. And that's led to situations where instead of spending a fortune that can't be cost justified, when you could spend an amount that could, you spend nothing. And actually what that does is it means networks don't get improved in buildings. It means landlords lose out on tenants who want those sort of services. And it's led to a situation where it's just got worse and worse for the carriers as well. If you skip on, when I said that this is an area that's already been worked on and is already moving ahead, these are just some examples. I won't go through them all. But Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, I mentioned there, that in the stadium is what we would call a traditional DAS, but there's a little building to the left of it you can just see. And in that office building next door, the club actually funds the connectivity rather than the carriers. So it's a really good juxtaposition to show the change over time because the club wanted the same level of service in their office as they get in the stadium. On the right-hand side, you can see the walkie-talkie building. We work with Savills managing the installation there. And again, you've got a lot of very important tenants in that building who demand mobile connectivity. And so it's a no-brainer really from a building point of view. There's a number of banks, obviously, in those pictures there, and that could actually explain some of the funding because these are important locations. You may have traders in some of these places who need to be on the phone when they need to be on the phone or need to be sending data, and they can't mess around for the value of the trade. And the lastly is the National Gallery. So we've been working with the National Gallery for about 5 years now, and it's a really interesting story because one of the ways we've changed this market is to deploy DAS sites in a different way to the way we historically would have. Historically, every site was a standalone site, and we had M&O's approvals to get, and they wouldn't give it to you unless it was a standalone site. Historically, every site had to have multiple frequency bands. In this location, the National Gallery had a budget, and we had to work from the answer backwards to say, this is what they can spend, therefore this is how much we can spend, therefore these are the frequency bands we can deploy. The other thing that the gallery had a problem with was space. The gallery didn't have enough space on site to actually say you can and do all the things you want to do. That then led us to create something called a base station hotel. Now, these have been built in lots of cities, maybe for small cell deployments on streets, and they've been built in some big campus locations as well. But when we took this concept to the mobile operators in the UK, they all said, we can't do that. We can't have base stations in one part of London that are linked via dark fiber to a building in another part of London. Our systems can't work out the handovers. So this is as you move in and out of the building, you move from the indoor system to the outdoor system, because the outdoor system we think you're moving onto will be the base station hotel system, not the system outside your actual building. So we had to work with them. We had to make sure they were confident and they were happy that we wouldn't be causing them drop calls, we wouldn't be causing them problems. And again, this is an example of the innovation where it took about a year to get this concept approved, to get the first site deployed. But once we did, if you skip to the next slide, sorry, the next one again. And if you run this video, this is an example. So this is, or was, our first base station hotel in a place called Finsbury Circus. From this location, we have subsequently connected more than the 5 sites on here. We've actually got 9 sites connected into here. One of them you'll see is the National Gallery. We then have other buildings across London. Churchill Place is actually in Canary Wharf, and it was connected. We've subsequently disconnected it, and we've built a new base station hotel in Canary Wharf because of the demand for connectivity there as well. But you can see we've basically built one comms room and connected multiple buildings. This has had major impact on the speed of deployment because it's meant we can already say that everything is in place in the base station hotel. All we need to do is connect your building with a dark fiber to our building and then procure and install the equipment. It's lowered the cost because over time, by working with the carriers to say you've already got racks in place, you've already got infrastructure in the base station hotel, we don't need to replicate that. We think the price should fall. They've embraced that model because they've seen more buildings than being lit up, more connectivity in more places across London. So the technology side there has really helped the pricing side of what we've done. And it's also been really powerful from an ESG perspective. We've now using less electricity because we have one comms room rather than multiple split across all of these buildings. We've been able to, again, work with the operators to use 5-watt radios instead of 20-watt radios by saying, this is in our base station hotel. We're responsible for the power output. Therefore, we want to minimize it. And that then all has major knock-on customers who don't see that, A, that electricity usage on site, and B, they're able to take credit for forcing this innovation in the market when they talk to their investors. So really, it's a win-win for everybody. If we go to the next. So the last area I just wanted to talk about innovation and changing of approach is private networks. One of the interesting things with private networks is there's been a lot of hype for a long time, and there hasn't been major innovation and major output. However, what we're starting to see now is that because people at the user end are talking about private networks, are understanding there are other alternatives to mobile networks. Ironically, most people don't think about Wi-Fi when they think about networks, they just think about mobile operators. By seeing that these use cases can be different, by seeing that they can own their own network, they're starting to think about the idea of funding mobile networks as well as private networks in a way that previously they weren't. Previously, it was no, Vodafone should pay because it's their network. Now, because they may have their own network, whether it's a sports club or a business, they're starting to say, we can control this. We can control what goes on the network, what the traffic requirements are, and we can therefore justify paying for it. It's having a benefit on a knock-on benefit on the indoor networks, and we think this could then roll into the outdoor networks as well. The last slide is just a little video. It's an example of a private network we've deployed at Crystal Palace Football Club in conjunction with themselves and a company called Give Vision. And this really just shows you why this concept can work, because actually there is a tangible benefit for the club for paying for this private network, which then hopefully will have knock-on effects later on. So if we want to run this video, it's then the end of the presentation.
With 1 in 30 people in the UK affected by some degree of sight loss, there's a significant gap in football accessibility that needs to be addressed. A recent study by Unidev revealed that 73% of sports fans with visual impairments don't attend matches due to the lack of accessibility options.
The 5G-enabled Give Vision headsets receive an uninterrupted live feed, ensuring users see every moment in sync with the pitch action. The key to this innovation lies in the speed and reliability of the Shared Access private 5G network, which guarantees a seamless experience for Give Vision users. Our network covers the entire stadium. This allows partially sighted fans to sit in their usual seats rather than being confined to designated areas, making this a truly inclusive technology.
We pioneered this because obviously we want to help the supporters that come to our ground, but clearly we're hopeful that this expands across the Premier League.
To be able to say that we're the first football club to introduce this and make such a vital difference, I think the main feedback that we've had from supporters is it's just completely turned around their match day experience. We had a gentleman that when he trialled it, we were lucky enough to have won that game, and he said it's the first goal I've been able to see with my own eyes. Sorry, don't know why I'm getting upset.
The Give Vision headset changes my experience dramatically. It enables me to actually see who has scored. I can see their visual expressions. I can see the people who are doing things they shouldn't be doing, pulling shirts and that sort of thing. You can hear it from the commentators later, but I think, oh, is that really what happened? And when it's down the other end, of course, I can't see it, so I'm relying on other people. But with this, I'd just like to thank Steve Parish, Shared Access, because it's not just going to be me that benefits from this, it's going to be the many other visually impaired people.
Offering a service like this for home and away fans is the same thing really. It's about bringing people together to support a team, whether it's our team or the away team, and having them enjoy the experience that so many of us take for granted. I think you have to see the technology to really understand how important this is. I would urge any club to get in touch with Give Vision and Shared Access and just see what they can do for them at their stadium.
It's a fantastic and inspirational piece of technology, frankly. It really is, life-changing in terms of giving people an outlet, giving them enjoyment that they haven't been able to have thus far. This is obviously a very, very good idea and a great piece of technology. So it's brilliant that we're the first in world football to be using it. We're very proud of it.
Football should be an inclusive and equal playing field for all. Give Vision and Shared Access are setting a new standard in accessibility.
We are incredibly proud to lead the way with this life-changing accessibility technology. Sport is for everyone.
So look, that's really what I wanted to talk about really in terms of the changing of approach and the change of mentality that I think is so important. You listen to that and you hear a club investing in mobile, in a network technology in a way that previously they would never have thought of doing, and getting that mindset shift is so crucial, because that really opens up the funding model that has been broken in most markets, with MNOs trying to fund these systems themselves, fund these networks themselves. They just can't do it. I think regulation could help, but really it's not about that. And what we need from government is economic help, really. Recently, you've seen that lots of mobile operators have come out across Europe to say they'd like 30 billion off their spectrum fees. If you just take that number, it means it's not going into the government's coffers, but if they truly want digital economies, 30 billion could roll out a lot, especially if you're doing it on an OPEX basis. And really, for me, the key is just about data. I think in life, if you don't want to pay a lot for something, it's usually because you don't value it. But actually, we all rely on mobile data. We all rely on private network data in some places, as well as you just saw, for some really incredible things. So I think it has to rise in a lot of economies, because that's the only way that the network operators are then going to invest or be able to invest on any model. So really, that's it. That's what I've got, Alex.
Fantastic. Thanks ever so much, Sam. And between all of the different pieces there, you've given us a whole lot to think about. But at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Ern and to Dimitris for your questions and responses. And I have a few thoughts up my sleeve, and I'll chime in with any audience questions or comments that come through. But Dimitris, there was a lot there. So what sticks out to you, and is there anything that Sam didn't cover that you'd be sort of interested in having him dive into?
No, thank you very much, Sam, for the very comprehensive presentation. It's great. Now, what sticks out to me is the actual use case you have enabled for allowing visually impaired people to enjoy a more immersive experience in the game. And sometimes this is exactly what's lacking in the telecom system. Keep discussing potential what may come in the future, but we fail to understand what people are interested in today. So that was a great example. Something that's practical and improving people's lives today. So that's really great. But from my perspective, I want to ask a question, Sam. It's clear that shared access is a neutral host, right?
Yes.
Active in the London area, but it seems that you are developing concepts of deployment process and even uh, versions of macro sites that you excel in. So my question is, are you developing products as well, infrastructure yourself?
Yes, in effect, we are. We never started out to do that. In our tower business, for instance, we've acquired, designed, and built over 1,000 macro sites since 2008, when we were really founded. But that street solution that I showed the pictures on earlier, effectively, that's what we're becoming. We're becoming product people, because from an operator point of view, they need innovation. And they've been doing it the way they've been doing it for a very long time. So it's very difficult to get them to change and to be different when they're managing a portfolio of thousands or tens of thousands of sites. So in effect, what we end up doing is we started by being financial engineers. We started by saying we can offer you macro towers in a different financial model. We can include your active equipment costs. We can include fiber. Now what we're ending up doing is taking all of that and saying we will now be responsible for delivering all of that to you. We will be responsible for proving that the site can be built, that the radios won't overheat, that the fiber and the managed service will be delivered, and that actually we can manage and maintain this infrastructure for you over a longer period. We also work with the operators in areas where we are actually managing parts of the network as well. So we actually have opportunities where we are responsible for KPIs, where we are responsible for SLAs, because we've integrated into the core of the mobile carriers as well. So yeah, depending on what the installation type needs to be and what the financial model and what the level of innovation within the M&O is, we are definitely moving into a product type business as well.
But essentially, you are a one-stop shop. I mean,
Absolutely.
An MNO in the UK can come to you and then you will use your arsenal of tools, including your own products, to deploy what's the most effective structure, right?
That's right. And again, this is why the mindset shift for me is such an important thing. And it's not just about the private networks. As we've moved into the in-building side of the mobile world, originally it was still funded by the operators. And the mindset shift, especially post 2017, for a number of different reasons, has been that businesses, landlords, and operators have said, actually, it should be someone else's cost rather than just being the carrier cost. That then has implications for the carriers, because they actually are providing services and they are actually being paid for those services. So even though we all think that they think of us as customers because we buy SIM cards, in reality, when it came to networks, they still thought of themselves as the most important person. They were the customer. Now, someone else in one of those buildings, the National Gallery, Tottenham Hotspur, someone else is paying. It may be through a neutral host like Shared Access, but they are paying that carrier for a service. And so it's the innovation and the mind shift that said, actually, the carrier accepts, I need to be open to you, I need to be accountable to you, and therefore I need to change how I think about my business. So yeah, it's definitely been a big shift.
Very good. That's all I have.
Fantastic, thanks. And Ern, it's good to see you. Thanks for sticking with it through some of those AV problems. Obviously, we've heard a good deal from Sam about shared access across in-building, outdoors, the financing, the private networks. You've been in the industry for a while, and particularly in the infrastructure side. What leaps out at you as being either sort of unusual or significant in this story? Oh, I think you're muted, Ern. Afraid not, sorry. I do apologize. Well, we better come back to you, I should think. Sorry about that, Sam. We'll check in with Ern shortly, but
In the meantime, I have another question for Sam.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
If I may ask, Sam, what are your future plans there? Are you expanding beyond the areas you are working on, or some new venues?
So we've seen a massive amount of demand for the in-building side of what we do. And that's across all of the geographies we work in. So we are in the UK, we're in 9 different European countries, and we operate in the US as well. And we're seeing pretty exponential growth, if I'm being honest. More and more people now are accepting they need to have connectivity. One of the big things that were holding it back in a lot of those countries, especially in some European countries, was that the carriers wouldn't engage. They said they would only do it on the terms they had. Now they're saying we are willing. We've seen the success in other markets, and we've seen the benefit economically of having someone else help fund our networks to actually improve connectivity. So we're seeing very, very large amounts of growth in the indoor sector. On the outdoor sector, on the macro layer, what we're seeing is that evolution and that street product really gaining traction. And I think it's a bit slower because the macro world is a lot more mature, and so it takes a lot longer to change. But it is definitely happening. The private side, what we're really seeing there is having that first use case, having that tangible benefit has really increased the amount of interest in private networks. And that's led to a lot of conversations about what are the next use cases. You earlier said, that's been the big issue, and we totally agree. We were monitoring this market for about 5 years before investing in it, because unless you had a reason to do so, why just build something? This panel is called Build It and They Will Come. Do we need to change, sort of thing? And the answer is yes, we need to change, and no, we shouldn't just build it. We need to wait until we have those use cases. So we're now seeing a lot more interest from sport. We're seeing a lot more interest from other venues that see the benefit of offering somebody who has a registered disability, who is losing out and missing out on so much in life, being able to offer that to them. A lot of clubs are just saying it's a no-brainer. So we're seeing a lot of interest in that area as well.
Great, thanks. And you mentioned earlier on when you were talking about shared infrastructure and giving the example of that post with the neutral host for telecoms, but also lighting and CCTV. It seems like there's potentially a large number of stakeholders that could be involved if that kind of principle is going to be scaled up. And I just wanted to check how you manage that level of partner management. Is that something which is scalable?
It's a really good question, and it is one of the main difficulties that we've had, because just working with the carriers alone can be quite difficult, especially if you have a large rollout and there's a lot of overlap between coverage areas. But yeah, working with the council, working with the club in that scenario, everybody there was aligned because it was a new build. And in some scenarios, when you are going from nothing to starting from scratch, it can be a lot easier to actually align those interests and to make sure everybody is working together. I think the benefit of where we are now as a nation, and in most nations, especially since COVID, where we all saw how important mobile connectivity was, is a lot of people now are less saying, what do I get? And asking for money. And they're now saying, how do I get the connectivity? So again, it's a mindset shift that's meant it's a lot easier for people like us. You're not walking in and being told, I will only do it if you pay. You're being told, thank you for facilitating. Now, what do I need to do? So it was a major issue holding things back. And again, that approach has definitely changed and needs to keep changing.
Thanks. And when you're talking about that, again, you mentioned, speaking of sort of multiple shareholders, having a your base station hotel, so being able to light up multiple buildings from a single location, and again, how extensible is that? I mean, is that something which will only really work in a place that's high density like central London?
The main consideration is how far the buildings are going to be from the base station hotel. Depending on the country you're in, you're probably talking between 7 to 10 kilometers, and that's as the fiber travels, not in geographic distance. That if you're within that ratio, you can connect. We have one base station hotel we've just built in London, for instance, that we think we will easily get 30 different buildings connected into. A, because there is that density of location around it in central London, but B, because of the size of the facility we have. We have another location in Madrid. We think we'll probably get 15 buildings connected into that one. Again, just based on the local buildings and how far we can travel using the fiber connectivity. So it's really about trying to be strategic. And this, again, from a shared access point of view, is where, as an organization, we try to be quite innovative and we try to learn off of each other within the business. So when we build a tower, we will build a tower with an anchor tenant, and we will hope to add a second and add a third and lease it up, as we call it, to increase our return. When we build base station hotels, we don't build without tenants. So we wait for the first tenant to say we're interested. Then we will make the investment, knowing we can add more buildings and effectively lease that space up to other opportunities. So yeah, you have to be strategic. But for instance, it could be that one base station hotel feeds a number of in-building systems and street solutions, as I showed the picture earlier, all of which then feed back into the same base station hotel. So it doesn't just have to be one type of technology. It doesn't just have to be indoor or outdoor. It could be private networks being fed from these locations too, from a core. So again, it needs the innovation. It needs that strategic thinking across the whole entirety of connectivity, rather than just saying, this is how we do it in this bit. We've always done it that way. We keep going that. We have to change that, and we have to say, no, how do we apply some innovation to this?
Great, thank you. I could go on, but I do want to hand over to Dimitris actually and check with you. You've been in the industry for a while, and I think arguably there's a big value in analysts like you having a very broad understanding of trends in the industry and what's happening. So rather than necessarily at this point focusing on shared access, it'd be good to understand whether this ties in with any trends or issues that you've been hearing about so far.
Yes, definitely. And in fact, this was a follow-up question I had for some, Alex, right? Actually, there are two trends that are developing in parallel to what Sam explained to us. And the first one is that there is increasing value in DAS and DRS in building wireless systems, And even some companies are even contemplating sacrificing their Wi-Fi networks in favor of DAS or in building wireless, right? Sounds crazy, it does, but there are many benefits to having a private 5G network on-prem. Of course, we're discussing large venues here, right? Large companies. But there are many benefits to using private 5G over Wi-Fi. And now if you look at the market, there is a resurgence of 5G modems built in laptops, which is, when I first heard it, it was crazy enough. But if you think about it, having a 5G modem instead of Wi-Fi solves many pain points for enterprise IT departments, right? Especially when you can use the public 5G network instead of a rogue Wi-Fi access point at the hotel or some other location. That's trend number one. So we see an enhancement in terms of market perception for in-building wireless. Now, the other interesting trend we're seeing is that these base station hotels that shared access is deploying, or perhaps the cabinets, the baseband cabinets in large venues that control in-building wireless systems, are prime locations for AI inference, right? Because these locations are centralized, they're very well connected. I mean, centralized. They are centralized in the context of mobile networks. They are very well connected. They have ample energy. They have dark fiber in most cases. So we think, in our opinion, that the next wave, the next phase of the AI super cycle, or perhaps the wave after the next one, will depend on these locations. So base station hotels or baseband cabinets in enterprises, right? Which I guess both trends I've explained are in favor of companies like shared access of neutral hosts, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah. So it seems like now that we have breached this, brought up the AI word. Maybe that's something that you can speak to a bit, Sam. It's not been in any of your slides here specifically, but obviously it does seem as though there is scope, if you're controlling the infrastructure towards the edge, to be able to do some hosting. Have you had much in the way of interest or request from people about this kind of thing?
I think it depends where and what sort of buildings are being, first of all, covered by the mobile connectivity that's being deployed from those base station hotels. AI at the edge could well require a lot of speed. It could require that agents are working not at a core level, they're actually working locally, which will rely more and more on mobile connectivity. So I totally agree. And I think the first conversation we actually had was with a carrier, because they were asking about the locations, they were asking about what they could do with their equipment and how they could also then layer these sort of things on top. So it's early days. I think the trend is only just starting, because we're only just seeing AI at the edge really start to be talked about. I only heard the term probably 3 months ago. I'm sure other people have heard it longer. But it's definitely something that is of interest, because in a way, when you look at this handset, when you look at this device, this could well be where most of the AI conversations, questions, interactions are happening, if it's a user-driven AI. Other things are going to be more centralized, they're going to be in bigger data centers. But actually, if I am making requests, if I am asking questions, chances are I'm doing it through my mobile device, and therefore I'm doing it through a mobile network. So it's definitely an area for us. We don't necessarily have a plan for it yet in terms of monetization. I think that will evolve over time. It may also end up being that the businesses themselves that are using that mobile connectivity and are funding that mobile connectivity turn around and say, actually, we think we should have an opportunity to monetize that because it's being based out of us, based on our internal staff and our questions and those sort of things. So it's definitely for us another area that you could potentially, lease up and make some more revenue from that BTS hotel model.
Great, thanks. And I have to say, although the examples that you've given have been in the UK, can I just sort of get some clarity about whether this is your key focus at the moment, or are you looking at a broader environment? And if it is the UK, is that anything to do with I don't know, the regulatory environment or anything else like that?
So for us, we're actually founded in Ireland. So we're an Irish business. That's really where we got going. So we roll these out across Ireland. We're in the UK. London is obviously a very large city, so it's got a lot of densification. But we've got a base station, our first base station hotel in Madrid. We're also looking at Barcelona. We're looking at Lisbon with one of our key accounts who operates out of all those territories. We've built sites in France, we've built sites in Germany, Portugal, Italy, and as I said as well, we're in the United States, which again, there are a lot of big cities with a lot of densification. So we see there's a lot of interest. We see there's a lot of growth in all of those territories. Really, in most of those, other than the UK and Ireland, it's focused on the in-building, if I'm being honest. The macro markets are quite mature. There's a lot of towers that have been built, and actually it's going to be a process, as I say, a mindset shift, moving down from the rooftops down to the street. So that will take some time. But for lots of businesses, for lots of landlords, for lots of municipalities, getting connectivity indoors is something they can work on now. So that's really where we've seen the largest shift mentally, and that's where we've seen the biggest growth recently.
Okay. And you mentioned, yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to sort of suggest that maybe if Ern's got some thoughts or comments, I know he's been having some AV troubles. If he'd like to send that anything through the chat, then I'll be able to pass that on. But in the meantime, you mentioned that at some points you've experienced operation from the telcos to things which on the surface seem to be extending their reach or their access to customers. Can you expand a bit more upon that and give some examples of where the pushback has been problematic or what seems to be underlying it?
Yeah, I think most of it comes from a positive place, to be honest. I think a lot of it originally was just about control. If you think about what these businesses historically have thought they were doing, they were building and maintaining networks. They were then selling services to customers, and they had certain standards to meet, just like every business does. If you go to a coffee shop and you order a hot coffee and you get a cold coffee, you're going to complain. So a lot of the time originally, I think it was that the carriers wanted to make sure their networks were built in the right way, in the right places, to the right standards and the right levels of quality, so they could then pass that on and be really clear with customers. This is what you're paying for, this is what you'll get. I think that mentality has shifted due to constraints in the market, due to financial pressures on the operators not being able to do that. And we've seen in different countries, it sort of comes out in different ways. Some carriers go full cycle, just take it all from us, we don't care now. Others are still got a bit of trepidation and are still a bit worried about saying, yes, okay, we'll let you into our network, we'll let you be responsible for some of these SLAs. But I think that was the main mentality driving that sort of opposition in the early days. What we really do see now is, especially at senior levels, there is a real acceptance in carriers in every country we've gone to say, actually, we need to do something different. We need to embrace change. We need to say that we can't keep doing what we've been doing for the last 15 years. We need to do things in a different way. And I think that is filtering down through the organizations. I think as well in building, because it hasn't historically been a huge part of what every carrier does. Some carriers in some countries have done a lot of it, but mostly if you compare it to the scale of their macro businesses, it's always been a lot smaller. Therefore, it's been a lot easier to shift the mentality for indoor coverage, which then has a benefit internally within the carrier to say, well, we do it there and it's okay, so why can't we do it here? I think as well, the invent of private networks has not scared carriers, but it started to make them say, hang on a sec, we thought we were going to slice our networks and do these things. If we don't embrace some of these partners, we might miss some of the opportunities that are out there.
Excellent, thank you. Now, I'm aware that we don't have a huge amount left of time left in the hour, but I'd love to check in actually with Dimitris and if we can with Ern or get some of his notes. Then I'd like to just get your thoughts. You've been in the industry and seen companies come and go. Do you have any concerns when you're hearing Sam and Shared Access talk around elements that might hold them back or prevent them from succeeding? I mean, it's not many years ago, for example, we might have talked about parallel wireless, for example, as an exciting young company shaking things up, and they've been struggling. So in your experience, is there any sage advice that you that you could provide that might be things to watch out for?
Well, parallel wireless and dozens of other startups have failed, Alex, and we're all aware of it. They were playing on a completely different market to a neutral host like Shared Access, right? And we heard some today that they are trying to solve a real pain point that telcos, operators have in selecting locations and managing them and even deploying them, right? So Shared Access and other neutral hosts operate in the real world layer, right? Rather than trying to sell products and competing with heavyweights like the tier one infrastructure vendor. So and on a global scale, we see the importance of neutral hosts and interest around their business model increasing. So the contrary, I would not be worried about Shared Access. I think they will thrive. And as AI gets deployed throughout the network, their business case will even improve, in our opinion, right? And this is something that we are writing in our research as well. So not only for Shared Access, but for all neutral hosts.
Brilliant. Well, that's exciting, and Sam, I have to say, there's a definite logic to building shared networks. Telco Forge runs some conversations under Chatham House rules with executives, and on a number of occasions, they've highlighted the insanity of running 3 or 4 networks in parallel and duplicating infrastructure. So, I mean, given that, I mean, do you see Shared Access's role extending further over time from some of the things that we've already talked about? And if so, what's the low-hanging fruit for you?
I think you have to be open-minded. That's probably if I could get one point across, innovation takes an open mind. It takes you walking in and saying, actually, I'm open to any of these opportunities. When we started in the end of 07, early 08, we were a tower company, and that was it. We built passive infrastructure. We didn't get involved with anything active. And we still do that in part of our business, but that's morphed now to what we talked about with the street solutions, where we are incorporating full managed service offerings, including active, including fiber, including all of those sort of things, power, to in building, where we now in our NHIB systems, we actually get into the actual core network of the carriers, as well as building BTS hotels with all the opportunities they bring. It's lots of different opportunities. Private networks, again, we're literally from end to end running and operating a network in that scenario. We're then working with our partners to incorporate other infrastructure onto those networks. In theory, why wouldn't we be working with security companies? Why wouldn't we be working with point of sale companies? There's lots of other things you could do. And so you have to be open-minded to all of that, because I think potentially incorporating it all into the value chain makes it more affordable, makes it a more logical thing to do. Sharing one mast for 3 or 4 carriers, as you just said there, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was a revolutionary idea. Today, why the hell would you ever build 3 or 4 masts in the same location? It makes no sense. So it can take a bit of time to get that innovation through. But yeah, we would be open to any conversations, because you never know, it may take a few years like the private networks has, but it still could be something that's transformative to the industry or to the business.
Fantastic. That's a really good point, in that needing to be open-minded, and that's probably actually quite a good lesson to take away, because we are just reaching the top of the hour at this point, and I would love to carry on the conversation, but I know that the webinar tends to get restive if I do that. So for you in the audience, if you are watching and you have questions, or you want to follow up with any of the speakers that you've seen today, please do drop us a line. You can reach me at alex.lawrence@telcoforge.com. I'll help to connect you to any of the speakers, or deal with any other questions that you might have. For now, though, I'd like to thank Sam, Dimitris, and Ern for their time and their insights. And most importantly, I'd like to thank you all out there for your attention, for watching. Goodbye.